Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of John Kennedy, and the focus is privileged youth. We go back to the 1840s in Ireland, where they were suffering through what was known as the Potato Famine, the potato being the major cash crop and source of sustenance on Ireland. About 1 million people perished during this era, and another 1 million emigrated, many coming to North America, Canada, the United States, including Boston, Massachusetts, where some 37,000 Irish came to Boston in 1847 alone, just far too many for that city to handle. It was a rough existence because there was very little work. They had to kind of live in slums at the time. Difficult transition for many of these people coming from Ireland, but for some, it also represented opportunity. In fact, the American dream would be lived out by some of the families that came over from Ireland, including a couple of families by the names of the Kennedys and the Fitzgeralds. Patrick Kennedy came over in the 1840s, and his son PJ, at the age of 14, went to work on the docks, one of the few jobs he could get, manual labor to start with, but he saved his money over time, and after a couple of decades, he was able to buy a saloon. Went into the whiskey business after that. He was actually making some decent money, and then he went into politics, was elected to the Massachusetts state legislature. He was able to raise his family in a means of comfort. His only son was named Joseph, born in 1888. He had very high expectations for his son, and he gave him this message: look, always come first. Second place is failure, from PJ Kennedy to his son Joe. Joe would later tell his sister that if you can't be captain, don't play. So very much part of the ethos of the Kennedy family. Well, Joe Kennedy was fortunate. He went to Boston Latin, one of the finest schools in the city. After that, or where he was actually named senior class president. After that, he went on to Harvard. He vowed he was going to be a millionaire before the age of 35, and he easily beat that, in part because he became the president of Columbia Trust Company at the age of 25. So around this time, it was time to settle down. For that, we look at the Fitzgeralds. And Thomas Fitzgerald came over from Ireland to Boston in 1854, raised 12 kids, starting out in the ghetto, but eventually moving up. One of his sons was named John, and John Fitzgerald also went to Boston Latin. He was known as Fitzy and later Honey Fitz. He got into politics in part because of his personality. He was affable, gregarious. He loved slapping backs and kissing babies. He would belt out a tune on the campaign trail, his favorite being Sweet Adeline. Eventually got a job in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he was elected 3 times the mayor of Boston. Well, Fitzy's oldest child is named Rose. She and Joe Kennedy started dating around 1913. The following year, they got married. They settled into their comfortable home on Beale Street, brought 9 children to the world. The oldest, the first to arrive, Joseph Kennedy Jr. Joe Jr., the apple of everyone's eyes. From Joe Sr. to Joe Jr., from a very early time, they were convinced this guy was going to be President of the United States. Made it pretty difficult on the second boy who arrived. On May 29th of 1917, they named him John, but mostly they called him Jack. Never easy for Jack Kennedy. That sibling rivalry with his older brother ran very deep in this family. In fact, Joe Jr. would often bully his younger brother. Now, JFK didn't give in to him, but this was not easy. He said, look, Joe had a pugnacious personality. Eventually it smoothed out, but it was a problem in my boyhood. Competition was at the center of this family, and again, the goal wasn't to finish second or third. It was to win. Didn't matter whether it was touch football or debates at the dinner table where the father would hold court and you better be ready for questions. Look, a family friend once said that they are the most competitive and at the same time the most cohesive family I've ever seen. They fight each other, yet they feed on each other. They stimulate each other. Their minds strike sparks. Each of them has warm friends, but none they like and admire so much as they like and admire their own brothers and sisters. Now, Joe Kennedy, this is the era of 1917, 1918, after Jack is born, and it's World War I. The United States is getting into the war, but Joe Kennedy wasn't going. He was an isolationist from the very beginning. A lot of his friends from Harvard went overseas to serve. He stayed and pursued his business interests. Became the assistant general manager of the Four River Shipyard. They were making destroyers for the military. He certainly did well there financially, but his immense wealth really kicked in after the war when he became a very successful stockbroker. Turn those millions into more when he went to Hollywood to make and distribute films. Money was never going to be an issue for the Kennedys. As for Hollywood, that also introduced Hollywood starlets for the rampant womanizing that Joe Kennedy, well, throughout most of his marriage, this was the reality. For Rose Kennedy, she wasn't much into physical intimacy, and Joe wasn't very happy about this. In fact, he said in front of some friends, "Listen, Rosie, this idea of yours that there is no romance outside of procreation is simply wrong. It was not part of our contract at the altar, and the priest never said that, and the books don't argue it." But then after the 9th child was born, Rose cut him off entirely. They were Catholic. No form of birth control was permitted other than abstinence. For that, Joe Kennedy simply continued to look for female companionship elsewhere. That sense of womanizing, another trait he would pass along to his children. Now, the father, Joe Kennedy, was often away. Rose Kennedy focusing more on the children. This was not easy. They had 9 kids. Rosemary, one of them, was mentally disabled. She required a lot of Rose's attention. Occasionally, she would go off on trips on her own, which JFK wasn't very happy about. At the age of 6, he told his mother, "Gee, you're a great mother to go away and leave your children all alone." He wasn't very happy. In fact, he was always sort of struggling to gain any sense of attention in the family, mainly because everyone was focusing on Joe Jr. He would have mini rebellions every once in a while. He refused to clean his room, late for meals, which was a no-no in the Kennedy family, kind of anything to stand out. Joe Kennedy Jr. was always the star, JFK basically sliding by. He started out at the Edward Devotion School. From there went on to the Dexter School. He did play some football there, youth football, but look, he was small, not the athlete that Joe was. At the age of 10, the Kennedys moved to New York, part of the expansion of Joe Kennedy's business empire. There he went to the Riverdale Country Day School. After that, went to boarding school for the first time at Canterbury School. That's in Connecticut. Spent about a year there before he followed his older brother Joe to the boarding school at Choate. At Choate, Joe Kennedy, of course, thrived academically, athletically. Frankly, JFK couldn't care less about school. He thought it was boring and meaningless. He was there to have fun, which meant mischief with friends like Lem Billings and Ralph Horton. The headmaster at Choate, George St. John, was kind of his wit's end about the boys. He called them derisively the Muckers. Well, the boys thought this was a badge of honor, and they created the unofficial Muckers Club. Joe Sr. a bit worried about this. He wrote to George St. John, the headmaster, that Jack's happy-go-lucky manner with a degree of indifference does not portend well for his future development. Well, Jack Kennedy graduated from Choate kind of middling, 64th out of 112 students, but those students voted him most likely to succeed. He had all that promise, just yet to be fulfilled. On the one hand, life was very easy for Jack Kennedy. Money, again, never an issue. This is 1930s. Great Depression has kicked in. The country is suffering, but Kennedy said, look, I have no firsthand knowledge of the Depression. I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard. Kind of a stunning statement for anybody in the United States during this era, but that was the nature of the economic situation of the Kennedy family. But it was also a hard life. His sibling rivalry with Joe Jr. didn't make things easy, and he had health problems. Health problems from the very beginning for Jack Kennedy. Before the age of 3, he had scarlet fever and spent a month in the hospital. At Canterbury School, an emergency appendectomy, and then at Choate. He's now 14 years old. He's just not gaining any weight. He's a scrawny kid, and look, they gave him one test after another, sent him off to the Mayo Clinic where they diagnosed spastic colitis. He wrote his buddy Lem Billings that, God, what a beating I'm taking. I've lost 8 pounds and still going down. Nobody able to figure what's wrong with me. All they do is talk about what an interesting case. He spent some details in his letter talking about 18 enemas he received in a course of 3 days. He wrote, my poor bedraggled rectum is looking at me very reproachfully these days. The reason I'm here is that they may have to cut out my stomach. Well, no, they didn't have to do that, but Jack Kennedy was in constant pain and the doctors really couldn't find a solution. After Jack graduated from Choate, his father said, look, you're going to follow your brother. You're going to go spend a year with Harold Laski, the noted economist at the London School of Economics. But Jack's stay wasn't for very long. Gastrointestinal problems flared up. He had to come home. Joe Jr. off to Harvard. Jack said, look, I got to get out of this guy's shadow. I'm not going to follow the family tradition and go to Harvard. I'm going to follow my friends, Billings and Horton. I'm going to go to Princeton. He didn't stay there long either. Again, the problems with his gastrointestinal issues, a couple of more months in the hospital, he basically missed that first year of college. Finally, he was healthy in the fall of 1936 and said, look, I'm not going to go to Princeton. I am going to follow the family tradition and go to Harvard. The sickly boy was finally going off to college, and that is the story for another day. That is Privileged Youth, from the life of Jack Kennedy, from the life of John Kennedy. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher. This is Presidential Chronicles.